This initial footage shows some imaging of the horse's hooves before I trim them. And as you can see, some areas have broken off, and he's grown quite long, but that's because he grows quite fast. And you can see all those rings on the horse's hoof. That's because he's probably has some underlying metabolic issues that we're dealing with. Now getting on to the trim. The sound is going to be lowered in this video, the natural sound from the actual original footage, because it was really windy the day that we filmed this and we were working outside. So I wanted people to still be able to hear the sounds of the tools that they make when I'm trimming, but wanted to lessen the sound of the wind in the background as well. So this horse, like I said previously, he's had some probably underlying metabolic issues, and you can see there at the toe that the lamina is really stretched, and he has a bit of what we like to call a lamellar wedge. And where that area is long and sort of disconnected, the wall was breaking off on its own. And where it was breaking off, it was also prone to cracking as well. So for this specific horse, I'm taking his heels down pretty far to help realign his bony column, and I'm removing a lot of that toe and lamellar wedge. And I trim every laminitic horse very differently. Like with this one too, I'm removing quite a bit of his frog, but that's because his frog is nice and healthy and strong. I just want to remove any bits that are really hard that might be causing him discomfort. And I'm also taking his bars down quite a bit too. And with some laminitic horses, I will not do that. I will not touch their bars, because sometimes those bars are protecting a horse with a thin sole. But he has quite a lot of depth at the back of his foot and at the apex of the frog. So I feel comfortable taking those bars down on this horse. This hoof on this horse. Because every hoof on every horse is different. So just really trying to make his heels as comfortable as possible for him. And in every video I make, I see something I would change a little bit. And so far for this horse, I kind of wish I'd addressed that hoof wall separation a little bit more. But I don't think it's going to cause any issues. So here's actually a before picture of the horse's hoof when I originally started working on him. So you can see that he's come quite a long way, even though there's a lot of work to do. His toes have come back quite a bit over time, and he's looking quite a lot better. But in this next view of the horse, you can see his full body. He's got a bit of a crusty neck, and he also has some fat pads around his tail head. And unfortunately, those are all signs of underlying metabolic problems. So I don't have any proof of that. It's all guesswork. But I'm assuming there's something more insidious going on with this particular horse. So now I'm working on the other front foot and going to do a very similar trim. This is his worst hoof of the two, I believe, even though he has some cracking on the other one. I believe this hoof has less sole depth. So I'm really going to concentrate, on taking his heels down and trim him very similarly to the other front foot. But I'm going to keep in mind that in the past he's been more uncomfortable on this hoof. So, dressing those heels. With a lot of laminitics, you need to take their heels down farther than you think you should. That's usually a general rule of thumb, especially if you've seen x-rays. And I have not seen x-rays on this horse, so just trimming a little bit blind, but just going off of kind of the natural visual markers that the hoof gives me. Making sure those heels are even. And like I said, on this hoof, most of the work's going to be done in the heel. Didn't take as much bar off because I don't think he has as much sole depth. So I want to give him a really strong bevel to help get rid of and prevent any cracking in the hoof wall, while also kind of bringing that breakover back and removing a little bit of that lamellar wedge. But there's a fine line between creating a good bevel and thinning the wall too much. So with this horse, on this day with this trim, that's what I'm trying to do with it. So I guess there was a little bit more I wanted to do. He kind of dishes and flares all over his front feet, and we're almost through the worst of it. Most of it's grown out. But I just want to make sure he has a nice strong bevel. And this time of year it's really nice in the winter. I feel like we can kind of get ahead of his feet. That may all change when we get into the spring and the summer and the fall again. But for right now, it feels like we're making a lot of progress on these hooves, which is always nice. Trimming in the winter is probably my favorite time of the year to trim because we usually do make a lot of progress on the hooves I work on. That's the front hooves done. Now I'm going to work on the hind hooves, which are in much better shape than the front hooves. And that's pretty common for a lot of laminitic horses. If we see hooves that have been affected, it's usually the two front hooves. And that may just be because the horse generally carries 2/3 of its weight on the front hooves. So we don't 100% know for sure, because I've also seen horses that have only had laminitis in the hind hooves. But for this specific case, it's mostly just his fronts that have been affected. Still trying to rebalance his hinds, but they're really improving at a much faster rate. So this is more of a regular trim that we'd see on regular healthy hooves. Just want to remove any areas of that frog that might be trapping the dirt and anything kind of sharp. And then for some reason on his hinds he's shedding some sole. And I'm going to remove the bits that are loose and leave everything else. So just like on the fronts, I'm going to do a vertical nip to help create my bevel and bring that breakover back a little bit. Because even though his hinds weren't affected as badly, you can see that in the lamina there's still a little bit of stretching at the toe. And that's why there's those black kind of fissures in that area. That's where some dirt has gotten into the lamina where it has been stretched. So still doing somewhat of a rehab trim on his hinds, just not as noticeable and not as severe as the fronts. So it's a much more normal, much more regular, balanced trim. So going to do the rest of the work on this hoof from the top. And just like the fronts, going to try to put quite a strong bevel on these hooves without thinning the wall too much. So the bevel on the hinds is not going to be as strong because there's not as big of a lamellar wedge on the hinds. So yeah, just rounding it up real nice before I move to the next hoof. I'm going to remove any of those sharp edges that might cause discomfort to the horse. This is the last hoof for this horse in this video. The last hind hoof. You can see he did a little bit of self-trimming on that medial side of the hoof wall, so I'm going to help him along by removing more of that excess growth with my nippers. And most of the work on this horse has been in the heels when I'm working from the bottom of the hoof, so that's where I've been focusing most of my attention on. But just like the other hind, you can see, now that we're nipping the wall off in that toe area, you can see some of those little black fissures that are kind of horizontal and vertical. And that is also showing us on this hoof that there was still some hoof wall separation and a little bit of a wedge, which told me he experienced some inflammation in this hoof as well. And you can see what I'm doing with my knife right there. The bar and the sole kind of grew all the way around the frog, which tells me that on this hoof the sole might not be as thick as it was on the other hind. So I didn't take as much material off of the sole as I did on the other hind. He might need that little bit of extra protection there. But this is the best frog that this horse has. So kind of just opened it up a little bit, but otherwise left it alone because it's pretty dang perfect, pretty beautiful frog. So just rasping that hoof smooth before I finish it from the top. Sorry everybody, had to pause for quite a big coughing fit, but in that time I did a vertical nip on the toe to bring that breakover back, and now I'm just smoothing it out. So now I've got this hoof forward and I'm finishing my bevel from the top. And in just about every video that I've made, I've seen something that I wish I had done differently or done better in hindsight. And on this horse, I kind of wish I had removed more of that lateral flaring from the top. Just a little bit, just brought it in just a tiny bit more. Other than that, this horse is almost done, and he trimmed up pretty nicely and moved off sound afterward. Here's some post-trim footage showing how the hooves looked after their trim. So much improved, but still a long way to go with this horse's rehab. You can see still is a lot of horizontal lines that show lots of small to large inflammatory events, and unfortunately there's not much I can do about that with just my trim. But the horse seems to be happy and walked off better after his trim and gave me a few releases at the end, so I think he's doing pretty good. Thanks for watching, everybody.